Imagine being torn from everything you know: your home, your family, your freedom, and crammed into a dark, suffocating space with hundreds of strangers, the air thick with stench, disease, and fear. This was the reality for millions of Africans during the Middle Passage, a journey across the Atlantic where human beings were treated not as people, but as cargo to be bought, sold, and exploited. The conditions were unimaginable: no room to move, barely enough food or water, and constant fear of abuse. Every day was a fight for survival, every night a battle with despair, as captives faced illness, injuries, and the psychological torment of uncertainty. Yet, even in the face of such horrors, stories of resilience, courage, and hope emerged. Families were torn apart, but the human spirit persisted. Communities were devastated, yet survivors carried memories, traditions, and strength that would echo through generations. The Middle Passage is not just a chapter of history, it is a testament to endurance and the capacity of the human spirit to survive the most unimaginable adversity. In this video, we will journey through this dark period, uncovering the experiences of those who endured the Atlantic crossing, exploring the inhumane conditions aboard the ships, and understanding the far-reaching impact on African communities and the world. By remembering their stories, we honor their lives and their struggles, shining light on a history too often hidden. If you are ready to dive deep into this story and uncover the truth behind the Middle Passage, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Join us as we explore a story of suffering, survival, and resilience that shaped the course of history. Do not miss out. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. The story of the Middle Passage is one of the most harrowing and haunting chapters in human history. A period where the transatlantic slave trade carved a path of suffering that would echo across generations. From the 15th to the 19th centuries, millions of Africans were captured, forced from their homes, and transported across the Atlantic Ocean to the Americas in a journey that became known as the Middle Passage. While the trade began on a smaller scale in the early centuries, it reached its horrifying peak in the 18th century, when the insatiable demand for labor in the colonies on plantations cultivating sugar, tobacco, and later cotton drove European powers to expand and systematize the trade on an unprecedented scale. Ships left the coasts of West and Central Africa carrying human cargo, often chained together in the holds of vessels designed to maximize profit rather than ensure survival. Families were torn apart, communities devastated, and entire societies destabilized as men, women, and children were ripped from the lands they had known and thrown into a world of confinement, fear, and uncertainty. On board these ships, the experience was almost beyond comprehension. The decks were filled with the sounds of despair, with the cries of children, the moans of the sick, and the fear-driven silence of those too exhausted or broken to even call out. Captives were packed so tightly that movement was nearly impossible, and the air was thick with the stench of unwashed bodies, human waste, and disease. Meals were meager, often shared from communal bowls, and many did not survive the weeks or months of the crossing, succumbing to malnutrition, dysentery, or other illnesses that spread unchecked in the suffocating environment. The few crew members, vastly outnumbered, maintained control through violence and intimidation, enforcing routines that minimized rebellion while maximizing profit. Yet, even in these conditions, acts of resistance persisted. Some captives attempted to resist by refusing to eat. Others tried to assert their autonomy in small ways. And some made the ultimate decision to leap into the sea rather than endure the continuation of their captivity. The Middle Passage was not merely a journey across water. It was a transformative and devastating experience that marked the lives of everyone it touched. Those who survived stepped ashore in a foreign land weakened, traumatized, and often facing immediate labor under brutal conditions. While those who perished along the way left behind voids in families and communities that could never be restored. The scale of the trade was staggering. Millions of Africans were transported, with significant numbers landing in Brazil, the Caribbean, Spanish colonies, and North America. European powers competed to dominate this trade, with Portugal, Britain, Spain, France, and the Netherlands all profiting immensely, while human lives were treated as commodities. Each voyage was a carefully calculated operation, a mercantile enterprise underpinned by violence and oppression. Yet beneath the numbers and records lay individual lives' stories of suffering, endurance, and the quiet defiance of those who refused to be entirely broken. Even today, the legacy of the Middle Passage reverberates across the Americas and Africa, influencing culture, identity, and historical memory. It is a story not only of unimaginable suffering but of resilience and the unyielding strength of human spirit in the face of profound injustice. Understanding the Middle Passage requires more than statistics or dates. It demands acknowledgement of the lived experiences of those who endured it, the cruelty of the systems that perpetrated it, and the enduring impact it has had on shaping societies. The Atlantic crossing was more than a leg of the slave trade. It was a defining crucible of human endurance, a journey that reshaped the lives of millions and left a permanent imprint on the history of the world, reminding us of both the depths of human cruelty and the extraordinary capacity for survival and resilience even in the darkest of times. The journey across the Atlantic was a nightmare unlike any other, a voyage where the boundaries of human suffering were tested and broken time and again. Ships designed to transport enslaved Africans were more than vessels. They were floating prisons, engineered to maximize the number of human beings they could carry while offering little thought to the survival or dignity of those aboard. In the dark, suffocating holds, up to 600 men, women, and children were packed so tightly that movement was nearly impossible. Chained together in long rows, their bodies pressed against one another, captives were forced to endure the heat of the tropical sun filtering through the deck above, the stench of their own waste, and the constant presence of disease that thrived in the confined, unventilated spaces. The air was thick, oppressive, and often unbearable, and illness spread with alarming speed, claiming the weak first but sparing no one entirely. As fevers, dysentery, and infections took hold and left bodies weakened or lifeless, daily life in the hold was a relentless struggle for survival. Food and water were scant, doled out in small portions that were often insufficient to sustain life over the long weeks or months of the crossing. Those who hesitated or resisted were met with brutality from the crew, who used whips and intimidation to maintain control over the human cargo. Women and children, although sometimes afforded slightly more mobility on deck, were not spared from abuse, and countless individuals endured acts of violence and degradation that left invisible scars alongside the visible ones. The psychological torment was constant. The uncertainty of survival, the fear of family members being torn apart or killed, and the profound despair of being uprooted from everything familiar created a pressure so intense that many lost hope entirely. Some attempted to reclaim agency in the only ways available to them, through small acts of resistance, through defiance, or tragically, through the choice to end their own lives rather than endure further suffering. Even amid such unimaginable adversity, there were moments that revealed the resilience of the human spirit. Stories recorded later, such as those by survivors like Oloda Equiano, recount the courage and endurance of people who faced each day with a determination to survive despite the overwhelming odds. Families were lost, communities shattered, yet the memories, languages, traditions, and cultural practices of those who survived crossed oceans with them, planting seeds of heritage in the Americas that would endure and grow despite centuries of oppression. The Middle Passage was not just a journey of physical displacement, but a crucible of endurance, shaping the lives of millions and leaving a legacy that would echo across continents and generations. As the ships finally approached the shores of the Americas, the human toll of the voyage became painfully clear. Many who disembarked were gravely ill, weakened by malnutrition and disease. Yet the horrors did not end there. They faced a new life of forced labor, separation from loved ones, and a society structured to exploit them further. The Middle Passage, in all its brutality, was the beginning of a long and harrowing experience that tested the limits of human suffering, but it was also a testament to the remarkable resilience, courage, and enduring strength of those who survived. Through remembering these experiences, the story of the Middle Passage stands not only as a record of human cruelty, but as a reminder of the extraordinary capacity for endurance and survival, even under the darkest and most unimaginable circumstances. The Middle Passage was a journey defined not only by physical confinement, but by relentless cruelty. A voyage where the basic necessities of life were withheld as a method of control, and where human dignity was systematically stripped away. Below the decks of the slave ships, captives were given barely enough food and water to survive, rations so meager that hunger gnawed at their bodies day and night, leaving them weak and vulnerable to the illnesses that spread like wildfire through the crowded hold. Any hesitation or refusal to comply with the orders of the crew was met with immediate punishment. Whippings, beatings, and threats became routine, a constant reminder of the absolute power wielded by the ship's captains and sailors over every aspect of life on board. The human spirit was tested in unimaginable ways, as individuals struggled not only against the physical hardships of confinement, but against the psychological torment of being reduced to mere property. Their identities erased, their voices silenced. Women and children faced dangers that went beyond hunger and beatings, as the imbalance of power left them especially exposed to abuse. The lack of legal protection and oversight allowed crew members to exploit their vulnerability, subjecting them to acts that left lifelong physical and emotional scars. Mothers were forced to witness their children suffer, and children were torn from the protective arms of family members, entering a world where survival depended on obedience and submission. Yet even under such conditions, many captives found ways to endure. Some formed bonds with one another, creating small networks of support that offered fleeting moments of comfort amidst despair. Others found strength in memory, clinging to the traditions, languages, and stories of their homelands as a lifeline to identity and hope. The voyage was designed to break the human spirit, but countless Africans endured, finding resilience in the smallest acts of defiance, in whispered prayers, or in the determination to survive against overwhelming odds. The cruelty extended beyond the immediate physical suffering. The journey itself was a psychological trap that forced captives to confront the complete loss of autonomy and the constant threat of separation from loved ones. Families were torn apart, and the uncertainty of survival loomed over every waking moment. The rations, the violence, the abuse, all of it created a world where hope seemed impossible, yet hope persisted. Those who survived the crossing carried with them not only the trauma of the journey, but the seeds of cultural endurance. Planting practices, beliefs, and memories in the lands where they were forced to labor. The Middle Passage reshaped communities, sowed grief and loss, and yet, paradoxically, revealed the extraordinary capacity of people to resist, endure, and preserve their humanity in the face of systematic dehumanization. As the ships reached the shores of the Americas, the human toll of the voyage became starkly visible. Survivors arrived weakened and sick, but their spirits, though battered, had endured. They faced further exploitation in plantations and settlements. Yet the experiences of the crossing, hunger, abuse, disease, and fear etched into their lives a resilience that would carry through generations. The Middle Passage remains a testament not only to the depths of human cruelty but to the extraordinary strength of those who survived, a story of endurance, survival, and the unwavering determination to hold on to one's humanity even when every circumstance sought to strip it away. Through understanding these experiences, we gain insight into the resilience and courage of the millions who endured the transatlantic journey, whose legacy continues to shape our understanding of history, identity, and survival. The Middle Passage was a journey marked not only by the cruelty endured aboard the ships, but also by the staggering human cost that began long before captives even set foot on the vessel, and continued long after the landing in the Americas. From the moment of capture in their homelands, countless Africans faced violence, dislocation, and terror, as raids and attacks tore communities apart and uprooted individuals from their families, villages, and familiar landscapes. Those who survived these initial assaults were often forced to march for days, weeks, or even months across unfamiliar terrain to reach the fortified coastal trading posts, their bodies weakened by hunger, thirst, and exhaustion. Along the way, many succumbed to the brutality of their captors or to disease, leaving gaps in families and communities that could never be restored. For those who finally reached the ships, the nightmare continued. The cramped, unsanitary holds, the stench of human waste, the lack of adequate food and water, and the constant threat of violence created an environment in which illness spread quickly, often fatally, and despair became an ever-present companion. Death was not confined to disease and malnutrition alone. The psychological torment was immense, as captives were confronted with the permanent separation from loved ones and the hopelessness of their situation. Some, unable to endure the unbearable conditions and fearing the future that awaited them, took their own lives, casting themselves into the ocean or refusing sustenance as an act of resistance against a system that had stripped them of freedom and dignity. These acts of defiance, tragic though they were, revealed the depth of human suffering and the lengths to which individuals would go to reclaim some measure of control over their fate, even if only in death. Every loss, whether from violence, disease, starvation, or despair, was a reminder of the profound human cost of the transatlantic slave trade. A cost that extended beyond the numbers recorded in shipping manifests to encompass the fractured lives and disrupted communities of those who never reached the Americas alive. For the survivors who did arrive, the journey was far from over. Weakened, traumatized, and often gravely ill, they were immediately thrust into lives of forced labor, stripped of the security of family bonds and the possibility of returning home. The death toll continued in the early years after arrival, as the physical toll of the voyage and the harsh labor conditions claimed more lives, leaving only a fraction of those captured to endure the full impact of enslavement. Communities were forever changed, and cultural connections severed, yet the resilience of those who survived became a foundation upon which future generations would build, carrying forward languages, traditions, and the unbroken memory of what had been endured. The Middle Passage, therefore, was not merely a journey across the Atlantic. It was a corridor of loss, trauma, and survival that began with capture, continued through months of unimaginable suffering at sea, and extended into the forced labor and hardships of life in the Americas. It was a passage that claimed millions of lives, yet also bore witness to extraordinary resilience, endurance, and the persistence of humanity under conditions designed to obliterate it. The story of those who perished, alongside those who survived, underscores both the immense human cost of the transatlantic slave trade and the enduring spirit of those who endured the unthinkable, leaving a legacy that continues to shape history, identity, and collective memory across continents and generations. The story of the Middle Passage is inseparable from the vast network of trade and empire that spanned continents and oceans. A system designed to commodify human life on an unimaginable scale. Over the course of the transatlantic slave trade, approximately 12.5 million Africans were torn from their homes, their families, and their communities, transported across the Atlantic in voyages that were as brutal as they were relentless. Each number in this staggering total represents a human life, a story abruptly interrupted, a culture disrupted, and a community forever altered. The destinations of this forced migration reveal the global scope of the trade. Brazil, with its vast sugar plantations and insatiable demand for labor, received nearly 40% of the captives. The Caribbean colonies, a mosaic of European settlements extracting wealth from sugar and other commodities, took in 35%. Spanish colonies, including the rich and developing lands of Cuba and parts of South America, received around 20%, while North America, where the cultivation of tobacco, cotton, and rice was increasingly profitable, accounted for a smaller but significant 3 to 5% of arrivals. Every port city, from Salvador and Rio de Janeiro to Kingston, Havana, and Charleston, became a point where human lives were exchanged, often documented with meticulous records that reduce millions of stories to statistics. European powers dominated this trade, each vying for control over the routes, resources, and profits it generated. Portugal, long established along the coasts of West and Central Africa, pioneered early voyages and dominated much of the flow to Brazil, while Britain emerged as the leading slaving power in the 18th century, transporting millions and supplying labor to the Caribbean and North American colonies. Spain, though slower to fully engage in the trade, funneled vast numbers of captives into its Caribbean territories and South American colonies, supporting the sugar and coffee industries that fueled European economies. France maintained significant involvement, particularly in its Caribbean holdings, while the Netherlands, though smaller in scale, contributed to the overall system of forced migration and exploitation. Each nation built an empire on the backs of enslaved Africans, creating interwoven networks of commerce, shipping, and plantation labor that shaped economies, societies, and cultures across the Atlantic world. The human cost behind these numbers is profound and impossible to ignore. Each ship that departed Africa carried hundreds of people into conditions designed to crush the body and spirit. And those who survived the Middle Passage were met with further hardships on arrival, forced into labor, subjected to violence, and separated from family members. Entire regions of Africa were destabilized as a result, with local societies disrupted. Populations diminished, and generations scarred by the loss of so many. At the same time, the Americas were forever transformed by the arrival of enslaved Africans, whose labor built economies, whose cultures influenced music, language, religion, and food, and whose descendants continue to shape the social and cultural fabric of the continents. The Middle Passage, viewed through the lens of these staggering figures, is more than a historical fact. It is a testament to the scale of human suffering, the calculated nature of exploitation, and the endurance of those who survived. It is a reminder that each percentage, each port, each ship, represents lives torn from home and cast into a world of uncertainty and oppression. It is also a story of resilience, as African traditions, knowledge, and culture persisted, adapting to new lands and conditions, leaving an indelible mark on the Americas and the world. In understanding the scope and scale of this forced migration, one begins to grasp both the enormity of the tragedy and the remarkable endurance of the human spirit in the face of deliberate and systematic dehumanization, a legacy that continues to resonate across generations and continents. The Middle Passage stands as one of the most harrowing chapters in human history, a journey defined by unimaginable suffering yet also remarkable resilience. A testament to the strength of those who endured the unthinkable. It was more than a voyage across the Atlantic. It was a crucible of endurance, where millions of Africans were torn from their homes, forced into cramped and unsanitary ships, and subjected to abuse, hunger, disease, and despair. Families were separated, communities were fractured, and countless lives were lost before, during, and after the crossing. Yet amid this darkness, the human spirit endured. Survivors carried with them memories, traditions, and knowledge that would shape generations to come, leaving an enduring legacy of resilience and cultural continuity that defied the very forces that sought to erase them. Remembering the Middle Passage is not merely an exercise in recounting statistics or historical facts. It is an act of honoring the lives and experiences of those who suffered and survived. It is a recognition of the systemic cruelty that underpinned the transatlantic slave trader system built on exploitation, greed, and dehumanization. By reflecting on this history, we confront the brutal realities of the past and the ways in which human beings were treated as commodities, rather than as people with rights, families, and dignity. The stories of the captives, whether recorded by survivors like Oloda Equiano or preserved through oral traditions and cultural memory, remind us of the cost of oppression and the resilience required to endure it. Each struggle endured, underscores the human capacity to survive even under the most extreme circumstances. But remembering the Middle Passage is also a call to action. It challenges us to confront inequality, to reflect on the legacies of slavery that continue to shape societies today, and to commit ourselves to building a more just and equitable world. Honoring the courage of those who survived means acknowledging the injustices they endured and ensuring that their stories are never forgotten. It is a reminder that history, though painful, holds lessons that are essential for understanding the present and guiding the future. By engaging with this history, we cultivate empathy, awareness, and a deeper appreciation for the resilience of the human spirit in the face of oppression. Thank you for joining me on this journey through history, for taking the time to remember and reflect on the Middle Passage and the countless lives it affected. If you found this story meaningful and important, please like this video and subscribe to the channel so we can continue exploring and honoring these crucial chapters of history together. By doing, you help keep these stories alive and ensure that the lessons of the past remain part of our collective consciousness. Inspiring reflection, awareness, and action for a better,